When I started at MSU about 3 years ago, um, my supervisor tasked me with creating an inventory of our digital collections, and that struck me as something odd to do. When I came in as a green young librarian, I thought, well, aren't all of our digital collections in the catalog? Haven't we already? I mean, we're a library. Haven't we already organized these and classified them and indexed them? And the answer to that was, yeah, we have for some of them. For some other ones, we've done a little bit of that. And for some of them, some of these digital collections, they're sitting in the equivalent of a box that's got the bottom rotting out, and we haven't really thought about it. Um, so what I did was I looked around at these. Some of these tools were out 3 years ago, like Drambora. Um, and some of the track and trusted digital repository stuff was kind of in its infancy then, I think. And I saw those as really challenging, hard to accomplish, and generating a lot of documentation. And I wasn't sure that that's what I wanted to focus my effort on. At the same time, I was kind of learning how to define my role in the organization as digital curation librarian. That was a new role, and there were some bullets in the job description of what they thought that would be, but there was no clearly outlined path of what digital curation meant for the organization. And so I looked around and tried to find something that was a little bit smaller and easier to work with, but still somewhat of a standard. So I identified the Data Assessment Framework, DAF, which was really a framework that was intended for use to kind of go out to academic departments and inquire as to what sort of research data the department collected. And so it involved a lot of interviews, an interview process, a survey process, and a lot of just poking around, digitally and into the human networks, I guess, to understand what collections existed, where they were, what was the story with them. And that's the method I took at Michigan State. And from that, I developed rather than something that would actually meet any sort of standard, I developed just an internal report to my supervisor, which included a series of milestones, 16 milestones that I felt were important for us as an organization to learn to meet. And I carefully pitched that to my supervisor, that I didn't feel it was my job to meet all of those milestones, right? One of those milestones was checksumming. I felt like this was something that we couldn't begin to think about our digital collections and curating those collections unless we had this baseline. And it's an interesting baseline because here you see this pretty interface from our Islandora-based repository where you see this checksum, and it looks like we're doing this very well. Well, this is only one of our collections, and this is actually a test collection. One of the things that I'd like to highlight about best practices is that all of our collections are in different states of curation. We have collections that are very well curated. They're very high value collections. We've added a lot of value through our curation of those collections. And then we have other collections that are not as well curated, right? And so our baseline and the example that I want to give for checksumming is that we rely a lot on our network architecture to enforce checksumming. So we have two stores of data. Well, we have three stores of data, 3 levels of redundancy. And 2 of those stores of data are synced using the checksum method, which will compare the checksums of the 2 stores as they sync, okay? So what that does is a really low barrier way to check that bits haven't flipped on either of those stores. Now, that's not the same thing as having a master checksum for every object in your collection and comparing back to the checksum. But it's much more low barrier than doing something like that. So with the DAF audit, we also did checksum all of our collections. And I know from talking to other people that a lot of times some of our collections have been checksummed and some of them haven't. And so that's kind of the situation that I wanted to highlight around checksummings. So this was a slide, or this was a thought from Dan O'Reilly about big data, and it says everybody's talking about it, everybody thinks everyone's doing it, so everyone claims they are doing it. And this is, I wanted to talk a little bit about data, migrations, and kind of our layer cake of preservation systems. So once again, we have many different types of data. We have legacy data. We have legacy collections, which were curated by my predecessors and my current colleagues as well. And some of those, many of those are distributed and curated and preserved in a variety of ways. But all of them, because of our network architecture, have a baseline of bit level preservation where we do have redundant systems in place and we do have geographically distributed storage. But that's only the baseline. And so I'm thinking about this layer cake idea. That's the base layer of the cake. I'm not a cook, so I'm not a baker, so I don't know how this layer cake thing works. But the next layer is really our registry, what has become our registry of these collections. And that's really intended to provide access. And the system for registering these collections is also distributed. Some of that registry takes place with a simple MySQL database for some of our collections. For other collections, they're in our Fedora Commons based repository, and we use that as a registry. The third level of our layer cake is the curatorial services that we're offering. Some of these curatorial services are ad hoc. They're the type of thing where one of our systems librarian, one of our systems staff, one of our skilled programmers will do something one-off on the command line, and that's one of our curatorial services. A lot of times we do R-syncing that way for some of our newer collections because we have a staging area and we move those collections around. Other curatorial services are things that we're attempting to build in a systematic way through our repository infrastructure. And so what you saw with the checksum example was a Drupal module that will allow any of our collections within that infrastructure to have that level of curatorial service. So I just once again want to emphasize that there's different things happening to different parts of our collections. Let's keep going here. I think about this a lot, and the whole there is the NDSA levels of preservation. When I've been working with our team to build our repository, I've been thinking that it's really an awesome system. Fedora Commons, Islandora. Some people use Hydra for these types of repositories. Some people are using other systems like Content DM or DSpace. But we really need to ask ourselves, are we meeting these standards of preservation? Are we meeting these levels in ways that work for our organization? Or are we just using these systems to provide access to our collections? Because that's what's easy to do. That's what our organization perceives as a value, right? When you are able to provide access to the collection, that's seen as something very good. And I think that when you really dig into the nitty-gritty of some of these are hard processes that we haven't necessarily developed software to do in a scalable way. Checksum and checksum monitoring being a pretty good example of that as a resource-intensive process. Another thing that I've learned is that it's very easy for me to develop a timeline for things that I want to implement and that I will work on myself. But as an organization, it's very difficult to understand how much time it will take to build new function, to change that network architecture. Anything that requires communication across the organization, it's very hard to predict how much time that will take. I love this quote. I haven't read that book, Talent Economics. I just found this quote. But I think a lot about this as we look out to these standards and OAIS and things of this nature. We are starting to rely quite a bit on these external ideas, and I think sometimes in doing this we will ignore the ideas that are happening within our organization. So an example of this is, once again, that network architecture that we've set up. We know that we want to have 3 copies. We've seen this as a standard, as a best practice. But when it came time to implementing that, it was a long conversation that took place over, in my involvement, 2 years, to both create a distributed backup, but then to create a geographically distributed backup, and then to create an offline backup, which just means, putting stuff on tape and taking the tape over to the safety deposit box or whatever it is. But, this is the idea here, is that the work that was required to create that network architecture was decided by our experts who are our information technology support. If I had designed our system, I doubt that it would have worked as well as or been done in the amount of time that our systems team was able to implement it. Because that's not my area of expertise. And so I really want to highlight that what I've found to work really well is to figure out how to translate and communicate these high-level best practices to our team in order to find a way that there's a meet-in-the-middle approach of implementing a standard or a best practice. And then the final thing that I want to talk about a little bit is that I really think culture eats strategy for breakfast. This is it's been a little bit of a trendy quote, I guess, but it's powerful and it's important. Here's the organization chart of our library. Yours is different. You have different people with different skills and different personalities. And one of the most important things about learning how to implement best practices for digital preservation is learning who to go to, what they can do, and how you can build teams to implement new features and new functions, because you're not going to be able to do it all yourself. So I don't know, I hope that some of that gives you an idea of where MSU Libraries has been in the past 3 years since I've been involved. Some of our best practices that we've implemented, and then some points for talking about maybe some of your examples later on in the discussion. So I'll pass the mic to Mike, right?
Here we go. So my title comes from something that the former curator of manuscripts at the Bentley used to say all the time. Whenever we work with a collection, we make it better than it was. And I think that's an approximation of what we do at the Bentley Library when we're trying to process or prepare our Born Digital archives for long-term storage. And I guess I should also mention that I'm kind of taking a maybe narrower view than Aaron and focusing on what we do when we receive digital materials from donors. A little background about my division and the library. The Bentley Library is actually structurally separate from the main library at the University of Michigan. And as a result, we have, people here at the University of Michigan Library, they think HathiTrust, they think big projects. And we're actually, this kind of little unit that's up on the north campus of the university. And so we actually don't have the IT infrastructure and support that the main library has. But we do have a division devoted to digital curation. We were formed in April 2011 as a result of just the influx of content that was coming in and the need to have a standardized approach to dealing with it. We report directly to the head of the Bentley Historical Library. And when we were formed, there were 2 of us with 1 grad student, and now we have essentially 4 FTEs, 2 people are half-time, and 3 graduate students. And our main responsibilities include web archiving, digitization projects, and handling the transfer and ingest of born digital archives, in addition to various other things. So here's my obligatory Open Archival Information System reference. And essentially what I'm talking about is right here when the producers kind of provide their content to the library. This ingest function is receiving this submission information package, the data and whatever metadata might be associated with it after its creation. And then kind of generating some descriptive information, perhaps performing some transformations to get an archival information package, and moving that along to archival storage. At the Bentley, the goal of our ingest procedures is to prepare something that we can put in long-term storage. But we have kind of adopted the term digital processing as a way to kind of increase our staff buy-in. We started talking about ingest, and people are like, "What are you talking about?" And it's like, "Oh, this is like processing paper records," and that kind of gets sparks an understanding about what it is that we're trying to do, because there are some real analogs between digital processing and traditional archival functions. We're looking at appraising the content, having some intellectual arrangement, identifying record series and groups, and then describing it in EAD finding aids and catalog records, as well as whatever access system that we use for this content. But this digital processing then requires some additional steps to ensure the authenticity, integrity, and security of our materials. So we need to really establish some intellectual control and also establish the integrity of the content once it comes in the door. We need to perform some preservation actions so that we can be sure that we will be able to access and use this material in the future, because use and access are 1/2 of preservation. And then there's a need to create metadata, which in the digital environment goes beyond simply identifying series and subseries and finding aid, but also kind of documenting preservation actions and additional administrative metadata, which I suppose has its place in the paper collections too. I also want to emphasize that our approach to this in developing processes, procedures, and workflows was highly iterative. Where we are now, we're not done yet, but we've come a long way. But it is this process of doing something once, getting some baseline things down, and trying to do it again a little bit better, making it better than it was. So our kind of interaction with digital materials on a large scale, this is Born Digital Archives, kind of goes back to 1997 when the former president of the University of Michigan, James Duderstadt, donated, along with the rest of his papers, his personal computer that had a lot of his speeches and idea files and whatnot on it. And this was kind of a boutique project to get item-level processing and description. It was highly manual. It involved like one by one migrating his files. I think they were originally in maybe ClarisWorks or MacWorks to another word processing document, and finally to PDF. And this was one of the big projects that kind of really pushed us into the digital realm. It was a little before my time. But aside from that, we obviously have received lots of removable media over the years, and by and large, that just got stuck, kept right in the folders that it came in on. Or, and maybe it was noted in the finding aid. Well, actually, it wasn't maybe. It was noted in the finding aids. But that was about the extent of it. With other material that was maybe high value, it was taken off whatever it came in the door and put on a server. But it basically kind of stayed there. And then we also have had non-media-based digital transfers. Maybe someone emails something to us, or perhaps there's like you can have access to this server location. But that was often individual items, like maybe we'd get some publications from the university, because the Bentley Historical Library, I should have mentioned this. We function as the university archives as well as a repository for organizations and individuals from around the state. But these, by and large, all of this received minimal processing. And then in 2010, we started a Andrew Mellon Foundation grant-funded project called MeMail. This was focused on establishing some policies and procedures for transferring and ingesting administrative email to the university, but we quickly realized that when we're handling email, we have to do something with the attachments that's associated with the email. And so we kind of expanded the scope of that project to include looking at other media types. And a big part of standardizing our processing procedures was to review literature and see what other projects were doing. And we realized that, wow, some of these things are pretty sophisticated, things that we are not ready to implement here. And but we weren't daunted, or at least we weren't too daunted. But we decided we need to define what we need here, just locally, and especially given our limited resources. For instance, we didn't have any IT support. There was one guy who did some database work, and then if someone's computer crashed, he would come around and try to resuscitate it. But that was about the extent of our in-house IT expertise. We also knew that we weren't going to kind of jump in with some of, I guess, the emerging best practices, specifically with the AIMS project. That's another Mellon grant project that was incorporating digital forensics techniques with their workflows. And this involves creating disk images of storage media, which is, I'm not going to get into that there, but it can produce potentially large files, which we didn't really have the capacity to store, and also introduces several other layers of complexity, and we decided we weren't ready for that. So we went forward with what we needed, and we knew that we needed to do basic things. Virus scans to make sure we aren't introducing malware or any nasty stuff with our content. We needed to calculate checksums so we could track integrity. We needed to scan for personally identifiable information and credit card numbers. We also thought that we wanted to create some preservation copies for content that was in at-risk formats. So with these requirements in hand, we developed a manual workflow. And I ran things through it, and it was successful, but there were some significant drawbacks here. There were about 40 discrete steps from, okay, we've got a new collection, through, okay, it's deposited. And it was highly labor intensive and very difficult to train staff because it required operating about 20 different applications. We had to have some strict conventions for naming and saving log files and metadata in case we ever wanted to go back and kind of do something with those, that metadata. And it just introduced all kinds of opportunities for user error. So something had to be done. But it did, that work and that manual workflow allowed us to kind of chart out what it was that we wanted to do. And if for nothing else, it was a very valuable process kind of going through that. So yeah, donor negotiations through deposit. It's that easy. And of course, these slides I'll make available so you can take a closer look at that. So we had this baseline stuff, and we decided we don't want to work harder, we want to work smarter. And inspired by the Archivematica digital preservation system in particular, as well as some work out of the National Archives of Australia, we realized that some of these steps could be automated so that we could kind of have a pipeline structure where we started a process, pushed the results of that into a next step, and kind of move things down the line. So we decided let's try to automate some of these steps. And kind of our proof of concept was automating our creation of preservation copies of things. Before, we would kind of do a search for maybe all the, some image formats that we determined were, kind of in proprietary formats, maybe like a Windows bitmap image, and then use image magic to create preservation copies of that. And so I wrote some very simple shell scripts that kind of ran through for various format types and called different applications, and wonder of wonders, it worked. And this made us start thinking, oh, maybe we could automate some of these other steps. And then maybe we could kind of link them all together. And then, we won't have to open up 20 different applications. We can kind of just have a single interface. And early in 2012, we kind of had a complete prototype, something we dubbed the automated processor, or AutoPro. Behold, in all its loveliness. The green fonts give you a nice tan in the winter. So essentially, this is comprised of 31 Windows shell scripts and Visual Basic scripts. And it guides our student processors and archivists through a 9-step workflow that's there's some manual steps and automated steps. The manual component is largely the appraisal of content packaging discrete chunks into zip files for deposit in our repository, and of course adding descriptive and administrative metadata. But essentially, these scripts document all of our actions and modifications. We save log files for all the operations we run, and also, if we do any file conversions, we keep track of that. And we produce some simple premise preservation metadata. It's in a CSV file, so it's, we didn't get tricky with XML or anything, but the information's all there, so if later we can do something with it. And thus far, we've used it to successfully process over 160 deposits of digital materials that have since moved on to our repository. But at the same time, there's some really serious limitations with the air handling of these scripts. Constantly, non-standard things come down the pipeline, and one of the student processors will run up and say, something happened, so I'll have to figure out what on earth is going on. And using a command line interface is very labor intensive versus a GUI, a graphical user interface. So we're hoping to get better there. But I should mention, I've talked about storage and access. I'll go beyond just talking about processing to note that we are using a DSpace repository for both storage and access. And it's like, our archival information packages are going into this access repository. Yes, it's shocking. But that's all right, because it's all we can do right now. The University of Michigan has a DSpace repository. It's called Deep Blue, and it's definitely not designed for digital archives. It's hard to represent an intellectual hierarchy there. The access functionality, it's download this file here, so there's no kind of opening stuff up and having paging through things. But at the same time, we had no means to implement our own repository, and the University of Michigan Library provides very generously IT support and preservation expertise, so this is something that's available and we're using it, and we're going to continue to run with it. We do try to save an additional copy of our archival information packages in a dark archive, which is some secure Windows storage managed by Central IT, and so we do have some redundancy there, but I think this is an example of how we're kind of playing with the hand we're dealt and kind of making it work for us. Now, I mentioned that this is an iterative process, and we are looking to move forward. And just yesterday, we found out that I guess it's kind of official, but we got a Mellon grant that will allow us to work on integrating ArchiveSpace, Archivematica, and DSpace into a workflow. And essentially, we're looking at kind of developing conventions and functionality that will let us kind of move data through a workflow and also enter our metadata just once and have it be shared, kind of be used in our EAD finding aids that we're going to create using ArchiveSpace, have it associated with digital objects in Archivematica, and also kind of ported through to DSpace. How it's all going to work, we're going to figure that out. But we're pretty excited about this, and of course we're looking to share kind of the codes and procedures and documentation with the community, and also hopefully maybe we'll kind of enhance some aspects of DSpace as well. So that's all. And thank you very much for your time.
Max Eckert. I'm the metadata and digital curation librarian here, and I kind of think we're on the working harder stage of things. Let me give you an outline of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about us so you can get some context of where we're coming from. Talk about what digital preservation looks like here, how we've compromised on best practices, and I want to end by talking about a practice that we found really helpful, which is to do informal audits with some other institutions, and this is a really great opportunity to meet some people to do informal audits with. So, about us, Grand Valley State University is a 4-year public institution. We have 24,408 students exactly. Actually, I don't know if that's true. We're a master's large institution according to Carnegie classifications. We're a comprehensive university, but we're not an R1, and we don't have the resources of an R1. This is kind of an interesting statistic from our president's office. It tells you a little bit about the resources that we do have. Our state appropriation per fiscal year equated student has actually gone down since 1988, which kind of leads me to talk about some of our limitations. And so first, an acknowledgement that yes, we have a beautiful building and we're in the Taj Mahal of libraries. And so yes, I acknowledge that. But appearances in some ways can be misleading. And just like everybody else, we have limited funds. So here, there's no line for digital preservation or curation efforts, at least not for things like student time software or hardware. Funds are currently maxed out, which means that in order for us to get money for digital preservation, we have to take money from something else. And so that can be a hard thing, especially because digital preservation is, they'll thank us in 10 years kind of thing, going up against other services that the library offers that have a more clear, or at least are perceived to have a clearer, more immediate benefit to our users and patrons. So having limited funds also means that commercial solutions for this kind of thing are almost always prohibitively expensive, which kind of leads me to my next point, that most of the software we want is open source. And I'm talking here about things like Archivematica, Bit Curator we're interested in, those kind of things. The problem with that, though, is that, so there's some good things. That means that they're free. But there's also some hard things. So our own campus IT, but also the library IT, they're both pretty small. We don't always have the expertise or the money we need to run the servers that we would need for these software. And so as a result, we end up with little to no support for this type of software especially. So what does digital preservation look like here? Well, it kind of looks like this, which is how I suspect, no matter what Aaron says, it looks at a lot of other places. One of the points I want to make is that when it comes to digital preservation, there's some basic principles, frameworks, models that people follow, no matter who they are. And in fact, these models, they're designed to be content and system agnostic, because people recognize that people have a different amount of resources that they can devote to this kind of thing. So it's what you do doesn't change a whole lot. It may change a little bit, but how you do it does change a lot depending on who you are and what resources that you have. So how we've compromised on best practices, or at least how we've tried to do this intelligently, I think we've done this in 4 ways, although there's probably more. Archival storage, and I mean, this sounds like it's a pretty common problem. Archival storage, and I mean this with a capital A and a capital S, using OAIS speak. Metadata, file formats, and those 3 are pretty technical in nature, but the other big thing is our role, which is kind of a higher level thing. So archival storage, close your ears. We keep some of our data on heterogeneous storage media. Specifically, I'm talking about digital video, and the fact that we keep some of it on external hard drives. We try really hard to be redundant. We have 1 copy here in this building and 1 copy over in the archives, but it's still on external hard drives. So I know this isn't ideal for a number of reasons, not least of which because external hard drives themselves are susceptible to damage, theft, loss, but also because the fact that they're disconnected or they're removable makes it really hard to do all those things that characterize archival storage, things like syncing and fixity checking and that kind of thing. So that's hard. And kind of the story behind that is we had archival storage. We had a plan for archival storage that, you know, our campus IT is very generous. They give us lots of space for this kind of thing that's very safe and redundant and secure. And that worked really fine until we started collecting digital video. And as it turns out, digital video is pretty big, especially uncompressed videos that you digitize. And so that kind of threw that plan out the window, and we had to make video kind of the exception to all of our rules. So we still use that space for some of our file types, but video is the big exception. Okay, so the other big thing with archival storage, you may also want to close your ears on this one. We use cloud computing. So I personally don't think that utilizing the cloud is a compromise on best practices, but I know there's some people who do. So I'll concede that yes, there are some disadvantages to not having complete and total control over all of your content. But it does help us out in a lot of ways. So one, it helps us out with the storage part, not really the service, the syncing and stuff like that, but the storage part of archival storage. So we can use the cloud as one of our storage locations, and actually the provider that we use makes it really easy to do fixity checks with stuff that we have on local servers, so that's good. It also gives us some geographic distribution that we wouldn't be able to have otherwise. So our network storage that's provided by campus IT gives us some redundancy between this campus in Allendale and the downtown campus in Grand Rapids. And so that's nice, but utilizing the cloud for one copy allows us to have a storage location that's in a completely different geographic area with a completely different disaster threat. And in fact, is in a completely different state. So that's good. And then I also just wanted to stress that all this stuff that we're doing, it falls within the cloud computing guidelines that IT has. We're not putting sensitive research data on here. We're also not putting kind of current university business data or anything like that. So all that being said about archival storage, this is probably one of the first places we'll be looking to improve as we ramp up our infrastructure in this area. Okay, metadata. There's not really too much to say here, but I feel like I have to mention it because it's in my job title. So metadata. Also, we're not using XML, or at least we're not doing a lot of coding in XML. But we are being structured and consistent, which I think are really what's most important. So for structure, we're also using kind of tab delimited text files, spreadsheets essentially, and like Mike said, that's going to make any future conversion to XML a whole lot easier. And then for consistency, we have well-documented guidelines that we use for all of our collections, or at least try to. And then I just wanted to mention that we're not, despite all my best efforts, we're not going really crazy with metadata. We use kind of a common sense core of Dublin Core for descriptive metadata and Premise for more preservation and administrative-oriented metadata, and that seems to work just fine. File formats. Okay, so this is kind of a fun story. I've been here for a year and a half, or a little over a year and a half, and so I'm a relatively recent graduate, new professional, and I will freely admit that I don't have as much experience with this sort of thing. But I came to this job very nerdy about file formats. I was really excited about normalization and migration and all these kind of things for all these different file types. So I was just really excited about it. And it didn't take us long, although it took some of us a lot longer than it took others of us, to realize that giving this kind of Cadillac treatment to every single digital object that we ever touch causes a gigantic bottleneck, and it's just not realistic. Especially because, again, this whole operation for us is very manual. So now we've kind of changed our tune a little bit. Our number one priority is to save and describe the bits. So basically that means getting the ones and the zeros and their associated metadata to provide context into archival storage. And so this is now kind of what data management looks like here. We always normalize for access, and in fact, especially for audio and video, we've taken steps in recent months to make this easier. But normalization for preservation happens more on a case-by-case basis, and it's based on a number of factors. And so we've kind of had to make a distinction between basic and full-level preservation. So with basic being a more of the save the bits kind of approach, and full-level doing all those file format related things like normalization for preservation and migration, that kind of thing. So in order for something to kind of qualify for getting the full attention, our full attention and getting full level preservation, we had to answer some questions. So one of those easier questions is about things like the file format. Is it common? Is it proprietary? Is it compressed? And those are relatively easy to answer. But we also have to ask some hard questions that try to get at the long-term value of a particular object or the future worth of a particular object, and those are a lot harder. Okay, the higher level one, sort of our role in all of this. I think in this area, best practice would probably be for us, the library, to provide a digital repository for all types of digital content that's created by the Grand Valley community. That would be the best practice, but that's just not realistic. And so one of the things that means is that sometimes our role has to be more educational than technical and hands-on. Informing people about best practices and that kind of thing. But it also means that we have to be honest. So when we're sitting down with a donor of a potential collection, we have to know what we can do and what we can't do, and we have to be honest about that with the people. And I think probably The clearest example of this in our case is with research data. My job kind of goes all over the library between archives and research data, institutional records, just all kinds of digital stuff. But I think the best example of this is with research data management. So we just don't have a data repository for faculty that are doing research on campus that will meet all of their needs, especially if you think about all their needs throughout the whole life cycle of a data or their project. So we just can't do that. So we have to, one of our roles is to be more educational than technical. So this means that we have to focus our efforts more on informing people about best practices, putting together a website, going out into different departments, trying to work with other campus stakeholders in this area, so other people on campus that are involved with the research project lifecycle, and then trying to get in as early as we can into the research project lifecycle, preferably during the planning stages, even before any digital objects get created. And this is another area where we had to be really honest. We have built some infrastructure in our archives and our special collections university archives for digital preservation. But this isn't yet a service that we can really offer to scholarly and creative content, things like research data that go into our institutional repository. And we just had, what we tell people is that we can use ScholarWorks, which is our institutional repository, to help them meet basic data sharing requirements that they might have for a particular grant. But if they need the service of long-term curation or preservation of their data, we have to look somewhere else, or at least set something else up. So sometimes, at least for me, taking this kind of role can be a little disappointing. You really want to be everything for everybody. But actually, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. It's part of what it means to be a responsible archive. Okay, last thing. Informal audits. In case you can't put it together, it's a way of getting an idea of your repository's trustworthiness, and I mean this with a lowercase t, without going through a formal audit or certification process. So yes, the idea of kind of, bearing it all to your colleagues at other institutions can sometimes be a little intimidating, but there's some good reasons to do it. One of them is that doing all this together is better, which is one of the reasons why it's really great for us to get together. One thing you might do is at least commiserate, and that's something we'll probably do today. But you also probably get some reassurances that wherever you are on this journey, you're kind of on the right track. And the best thing that can happen is you get new ideas, something that you kind of get focused on your work, but somebody can tell you something that you didn't know and make your life a whole lot easier. The other reason to do them is that informal audits are actually a lot less scarier than formal audits, something like TRAC or this would trusted, or TDR, what does that stand for again? Trusted Digital Repository. That would be the capital T. So, and in fact, especially if you're looking at something like a data seal of approval, there's actually only 3 repositories in North America that had actually applied for that and got it, so it's really hard to do. The last reason to do them is because you don't have to start from scratch. There's some pretty good models. There's good old OAIS, and this is one I used with the Henry Ford Museum and Archives, and then more recently, we used, the 4 of us, used the NDSA's levels of digital preservation, which is also another really good thing. I really like that this is progressive, so it kind of starts out on the left with where you should start, and advances as you go to the right. So yeah, that's all I had.
Okay, so I think we'll kind of do the group kind of discussion question part from here. That's okay. It's kind of weird. I never realized how weird it feels to not have a table in front of you and a whole bunch of people are looking. But I'll like flip my chair around and be like the cool teacher that wants to rap. Yeah, so let's open up the floor for some questions or comments that you all may have.
So normalization, it's another word for kind of conversion. It has to do with file formats. So that data management part of OAIS is like, so for instance, if you were to receive obsolete file format from a donor, then you might normalize that on ingest for, it's all these words, but you might convert it to a file format that's recognized as having, people predict that it's going to last way out into the future, and that would be, that's so converting it for preservation, and that's the normalization part. And then you can also do it for access, which, you're not as concerned about long-term preservation of that particular file because all you're using it for is to provide a derivative copy of it. So a lot of times this makes the most sense with digital video. So we couldn't, we have terabytes of video that would just be, it would, I don't even know how long it would take for somebody to download that from the internet. So we make MP4s or whatever to provide sort of more immediate access to something. Well, if you're, for access, yes, you do whatever it makes the most sense for your user community. So preservation, there's other questions you have to answer, but yes, for access, you might compress it. Is that true?
So one of the limitations for doing is budget, and budgets are often not set by us, but those above us, and working to train and inform those who set our budgets and those who kind of policy and agenda for our institutions. I'm wondering if you have examples of what work where you've done based on your limited abilities, been able to demonstrate that this to administration to then kind of help sell them on why you're doing this, and perhaps then more money, more bonds, administration bonding to improve the practice, or just working with administration to get bonding to because budget and staffing is a big part of being able to achieve minimal.
I can say a little bit about that. The only thing that I know that's been effective for us is, it is an administrative challenge. I think it's a role for our administrators to champion. But in order to be able to do that, to be that advocate, for our middle level administrators to be the advocate to the upper level administration, for upper administration to be advocate for, administration at the campus level, for that chain to happen, we have to be able to provide kind of a value proposition for our services. And what that means is being able to find visible outcomes that show both that an initial investment, a pilot, has paid off in some way, whether that's just more educate. I like that idea of education as a big part of this as much as the technical challenge. So whether that's helping staff develop in their own skill sets and helping other people contribute to the challenge, that's the kind of thing like teamwork and the ability to act on some of these hard situations where, Mike set up this workflow, 9 steps of this stuff. This works. This does something. We're ready for the next step. That takes another level of investment. So the only way I've been able to chip away at it is start a pilot project, get some good results, and try to kind of keep that iterative cycle going of building buy-in. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that email archiving project I mentioned allowed us to demonstrate that there was a need for increased policy, procedures, infrastructure. And I think a similar, another example, though, to respond to your question is with web archiving. Our university archives was able to document that there was a gap in the recording newsletters, degree requirements, catalogs, as colleges and schools were moving to just online publication. And by not having a web archiving program, we were essentially failing in part of our mission. And so by kind of demonstrating that gap, we were able to put forth an argument like, yes, we need to invest in a subscription for a larger web archiving program. And so that, from a collecting viewpoint, we're able to make, get more resources.
I think the only thing that I could add to that is that we just finished up a process actually of, one of the things that our administration asked us for was some sort of document or way for them to talk to the university administration about things like digital preservation efforts or the curation of digital objects. So we went through this process sort of with a committee with representatives from different areas of the library, where we tried to really, and it was very hard actually, but tried to articulate the need for all these different types of digital objects that we have some role in creating or collecting, that are created by us, that are created by the university. Try to articulate our role, and then from there, why we're doing things, and then what sort of needs we have. And so I think there was sort of this baseline where we had to get all our ducks in a row before we wanted to approach the university administration. And the outcomes of that have actually been really good. So yeah, that's the administration. So
just because I'm the only dean here, if I could just, I had two thoughts. I meant what I said when I talked to you all at the beginning, that I had a profound shift in my understanding over the last decade and a half of the future of the importance of these projects. And I don't think I'm overstating the fact when I say these projects take precedence over almost anything else we're collecting, in my opinion, in terms of long-term good for our institutions and for the publics we serve. Deans and other administrators have to find a way to shift their thinking from putting way too much value, balancing the value they assign. The default value is collections that you used to report in ARL type of data, and for a long, long time you had no option because you got ranked in 1,000 ways and you had no choice. For all the rest of the institutions, the 3,000 or so of us who were never ARL and will never be, we have a lot more freedom of choice. And to me, one of the leadership issues the dean has to grapple with is how do you then assess what you're going to invest in? Are you going to continue to invest in redundant, largely digital scholarly communications resources, which are absolutely essential to our academic programs? Or are you going to find ways to be smarter about how you deliver those resources, not necessarily buying them all, but looking for alternative delivery or sharing methods in order to free resource to move over into this emerging field where video, data, the traditional archival kinds of things you all are talking about that have value intrinsically, it's just nobody knows about them, so they can't get to them. So I think there's got to be a shift. And my point there is that's an academic library problem. That isn't an archive problem. It redounds to you, but it starts with leadership in academic libraries. So I don't know if you get your stuff together as a group of archivists, but I would strongly urge you to attack ACRL. Get this issue out in front of directors. People need to be making value judgments. And I don't know who's going to spark that argument other than you, the experts. So that's one thought I had. And if you brought that down to the Michigan level, there's a group called COLD of library directors for the public institutions. And there has been an institution for the smaller institutions. And right now they're a bit cut adrift. But a summit, a director's summit, I mean, I don't know what's possible to do, but you could give some thought to tying into what Max was saying. One of the things I asked for is I am absolutely committed to finding the resource to get us up to being a fully functioning best practice archive. We may still compromise because we're never going to have more money than we need, but to do that intelligently and to do it responsibly and to do it fully, how do we ramp up? It is very difficult as a dean. Archival projects are the same black hole to a dean that library budget funding has always been to provosts. there's no end. It's a perfection that can never be reached. There's never something else you can't buy or digitize. So I think also, strategically, your dean may be fully oriented philosophically and have no clue what that means in terms of what does it mean about staff? What are there incremental steps you can take? If you started small, what's the first thing you need to do? What's the thing you need to do after that? So I just would endorse again Max's thing. The reason we struggle so, we need to speak with one voice. We had to learn how to do that. How do we say what our problem is in a way that we all understand and can repeat to others so we have a consistent message? So anyway, I just, out of my passion and out of my belief in what you're doing, I would just urge you to educate the deans. Go to ACRL where they all congregate. Put on a program, put on a series of programs. Get in front of their faces. Ask to come to cold. If that was appropriate to do, to talk about how do we bring academic institutions to a base level. What does a base level look like? Anyway, just my thoughts. Sorry, thanks for listening.
Yeah, when I started at MSU, all of our programs were in place. Digital curation was just a new word. We were already curating our collections through our systems work and our web services work and our digitization team. So we were already doing the work. We just weren't calling it digital preservation or digital curation at that time. When I looked around, I was only looking in the library for digital collections. We've talked before about how difficult it is to comprehensively assess the collections of the campus, although we did do some sort of maybe deep dives is the appropriate word for understanding some of the collections that existed on campus, and that was work that was done by my supervisor and the director of University Archives, and they released a report on that. But yeah, my focus was on library collections, digital collections, and you know, it's interesting. Do I think we found them all? I think that all of the library collections that we've designated as being preservation worthy, those have been highlighted in some way through our collection development, and so those we're aware of. But there are certainly collections of stuff around the library that's digital, that's on servers that aren't the primary preservation servers. Yeah, there's lots of that stuff. But I would say that we've done a very good job of using our subject specialists to assist us with identifying maps for the maps collections, or so various things like that. Does that answer your question? Our university archives? Mm-hmm. So we have a separate institutional university archive, yeah. And so those collections weren't included either. Yep.
add a little bit. This might be like unique to kind of academic institutions, but I think libraries are seen as places where this kind of stuff should go, and that's great. But it's almost, at least at Michigan, it's putting a lot of pressure on us to be able to deliver that, to be able to meet that expectation, especially when it raises to things like research data, and things that are really, really different than anything else we've ever really dealt with. Moving image, it's the exact same thing. Like we can't really deal with it right now, and yet it's still, so the library's role is to do this, kind of be this steward for this information on campus. And it's great that people come to us for this, and it's scary that people come to us for this, because how do we cost it? How do we do? People that come to us, I think, have a very different view of how digital material stored, right? Like digital storage, I think, can be a very kind of abstract, cloudish kind of thing, and you don't see it, so the cost associated with that maybe isn't factored in. And how do you continue to provide preservation and curation services to really as a campus-wide thing? And it can be, there's not just our College of Arts and Sciences have all of the different museums, and then they digitize all of the time, and that stream is plugged into the library. So how do we kind of continue to deliver that? I think it's a big question. Because we don't want to say no. Are there any other questions or comments? It's unfair we're actually in the room with lunch to keep you, yes. Yeah, so just not to dominate, but in our case, yes. So I think we actually digitize very little. I think that's actually happening in the thing. The challenge with that becomes they want us that we're seen as the repository for it. So we're seen as the place to archive it, to store it, and also to provide access to it. So it's been challenging to engage them on their processes that they have, to where it plugs in to kind of what we consider preservation type, like file formats and kind of just their workflows and things. So yes, yeah, we're definitely, there's a lot of activities going on campus that are digitizing and things like that. And I think rightfully so, they want it to be in the library, kind of one kind of portal to view all of this stuff. But then it becomes that we don't have to actually work at digitizing it, but we still have to talk a lot to them about how to digitize for preservation, which is a different animal than let's just scan something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I really like what Max said about being a responsible archive and being honest with our what we might consider donors of these digital collections. We say no all the time. There are, we as a library won't collect anything that doesn't fit within our mission or our collection development policy, and it feels very, I very much want to be able to say yes every time, but there's a number of times where we have to say no. And in those circumstances, we do try to offer up some alternatives, offer up, use it as a learning moment or whatever you want to call that. But yeah, we do have to do that. And then lastly, it is sometimes if we think about this in the donor model and the gifts model, sometimes we can think about it as a development opportunity for the library or for your organization, which is that there are a number of times where we would like to accept a gift, but it would incur significant costs for us, and so sometimes we will approach the donor of that item and clearly articulate what value we're going to add to preserving and making that collection available, but sometimes that comes with a price, and I think that just needs to be recognized. So.
And we have some guidelines on our website that we point donors to that we've adapted from information available from the Library of Congress about kind of some baseline specifications if they're going to do some scanning at home. But we've also had success in directing donors to vendors. We recently had some conversations with the DAR of Michigan that had a number of volumes of proceedings they wanted to digitize and have those donated to the library. And we connected them with a vendor in the Ann Arbor area that we were able to get a high quality scans that we'll get a copy of. It'll make the DAR happy, and so kind of it's a win-win. But I agree that saying no is a good thing also. Not recently, a while ago, this fella gave us this huge database of scanned rock and roll posters, which are pretty cool, but they're all copyrighted. They're huge images on it, and I think it was really a mistake to take them because it took a ton of time and money to process them, to get them out of the original database, and now there's very limited access since they're all copyrighted. And so that was something where it didn't quite fit in our collecting policy. We wanted to kind of be nice to the donor because we were hoping to get some other collection from them, but it's kind of like, we got this white elephant sitting in our reading room. So I don't know if you have anything.
Not really a whole lot to add, I guess. Although we're kind of had similar situations. I'm actually personally really bad at saying no. So I appreciate some of the perspectives of my colleagues. But we've also had some success with kind of helping out donors. Like if there's this one collection I'm thinking of in particular is this collection of sermons that are written down and also sometimes audio recorded and sometimes video recorded of an influential minister from West Michigan. And so these people that have his collection, they really love this guy, and they love all the stuff that he's done, and they're more than willing to do a lot of the work, like digitization. They do some of the metadata. And so, but yeah, trying to kind of teach them the way that a library does those things can sometimes be hard, and especially because you're coming from two very different places, and so yeah, that's it. All right, my name is, so does anybody know what the Northern Cities Shift is? Anybody ever heard of it? Well, I hadn't either. The Northern Cities Vowel Shift is a significant change in vowel pronunciation that is currently developing in some northern inland U.S. cities. So it's the dialect that's spoken in places like Grand Rapids today, although it's most consistently present in Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, Detroit, and Chicago. So people who use this dialect say the word block the way that other people say black, and buses the way other people say bosses. I don't know if that sounds like anybody you know. It's spoken by some famous contemporaries, such as Drew Carey, who's from Cleveland, Ohio, Ashton Kutcher from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and John Goodman, who's from St. Louis, Missouri, and by this famous person. Wait, nobody knows her? This is Mildred Scholes. She's a single working girl from Grand Rapids, Michigan. She worked in the Voigt flour mill as a secretary. She was born at St. Joseph on the Lake in 1890 and lived here all her life. So that's Mildred Scholes. And this is her mouth. Does anybody know what this is? Oh, I thought you raised your hand. I was felt impressed. I certainly didn't before this project. This is a vowel chart. Specifically, it's the vowel chart for Mildred Scholes. The chart shows where, on average, her tongue touches the roof of her mouth when she pronounces vowels in words like fleece. So the left side of the chart represents the front of her mouth, and the top of the chart represents the roof of her mouth. So that's kind of cool. But why am I telling you all this? What does this have to do with digital preservation? I want to tell you a quick story, and apparently I deviate from the story a lot, so I'm going to read it so I don't take too much time. A few months ago, we got an email from an English professor at the University of Missouri inquiring about a digital collection of ours he had discovered through a Google search, entitled Grand Rapids Oral Histories. So these are taped interviews of Grand Rapidians that were conducted in the early 1970s. He wasn't interested in a history of Grand Rapids, though. Instead, he was a linguist interested in doing a speech analysis of vowel pronunciations using a specialized computer algorithm. So we have compressed streaming versions of these oral histories online, but he asked if we had higher quality versions available that he could use. So normally, the answer to that question would be yes. But as it turns out, we didn't have preservation masters and archival storage for about half of this particular collection. So this is because, for this project at least, preservation masters never got created consistently, and the preservation masters that did get created didn't get stored in archival storage consistently. So archival storage at the time was, this was 8 years ago, consisted of a copy on local network storage and a copy on archival CD. Quality control wasn't great, and when all this was discovered at the time, we decided not to do anything about it. And this is because what we had done was good enough for access. I mean, they were available online. And because we had a just cross your fingers mentality in place. So we started scrambling. We still had the original reel-to-reel tapes, so we thought we'd just have them re-digitized by our on-campus digitization pros. They're the ones that did it in the first place. And we did, only to find out that in the intervening 8 years since they had been originally digitized, our pros had gotten rid of their reel-to-reel player, and that in the intervening 40-ish years since the original reel-to-reel tapes had been produced, they had developed what's called sticky shed syndrome, which was a new word to me, but apparently it's pretty familiar to archivists. And so in any case, we couldn't get a good read. So 2 reel-to-reel players later, that's kind of a long story, and after ultimately deciding against sending the tapes out to be baked, which was prohibitively expensive, and after talking again with the English professor, who assured us that some other interviews would do, we got what we could digitized, this time being sure to make a preservation master that got stored in archival storage, and we shared this with the researcher. So he was able to do his analysis, which is how we have the vowel chart for Mildred Scholes, and it turns out that she is the earliest acoustic evidence of the northern city shift occurring in this area. Also, Nancy and I are getting thanked in the acknowledgments of his upcoming book chapter, which in my mind is kind of like a holy grail of librarianship. So, what lessons did we learn? It's kind of interesting. The lessons seem to have something to do with the entire life cycle of a digital object. So the first lesson we learned is that digitization is not the same thing as digital preservation. You can digitize all you want, but you also have to think about preservation. Digitization is a time-limited process, but digital preservation is an active, ongoing process. And I think we kind of conflated the two. Cradle decisions are just as important as grave decisions. So this is kind of an interesting quote. This is from the English professor. The issue with MP3s versus waves for us is that it's usually impossible to know what information has been lost during compression. So isn't that interesting? He sounds just like one of us. Many times we don't have control over how a digital object gets created. This is particularly true when you're talking about born digital stuff. But other times we do, and this is when we're talking about digitization projects. So it's worth it to create them right and consistently. Kind of be happy you did later. Optical disks, even archival quality optical disks, no longer really count as archival storage. They certainly can't be the only place that you have preservation masters. So when this storage media started to go obsolete, it was our responsibility, sort of administrative management kind of responsibility, to start getting our SIPs and APEs off of this kind of storage and onto more current storage. And if we had done this at the appropriate time, maybe we would have discovered this earlier. 2 more things. Search engine optimization improves the visibility and usage of your collection. So this is more on the access side. Digital repositories are notorious for being bad at search engine optimization. But there's some steps that we can do to make search engine optimization better, and those are worth it. And then lastly, just like people find ways to reuse old Mac computers, scholars and other people really do reuse our digital materials, and we don't necessarily know how they're going to do it. So the easier your objects are to repurpose, remix, or reuse, and in general, the more open they are, the better. All right.
Okay. Hi. I'm not going to be using slides because I really hate PowerPoint unless I absolutely have to use it. So my name is Kyle Felker. I'm the Digital Initiatives Librarian here at GVSU. That title usually doesn't mean a whole lot to people, so I have a number of other titles that I've given myself that I think are a little bit more descriptive, like Instigator of New Stuff and Sexy Technology Guy. I like that one. It leaves it indeterminate as to whether the sexy applies to the technology of the guy. Last year, our dean asked me to lead a small group of librarians that included our head of collections, our metadata librarian, our archivist, and a couple of other people who had a sort of stake in digital object management within the library. And our objective was to try and define some of the challenges that were facing us in terms of managing digital objects as we move forward. So we have a very robust scholarly communications program. They were experiencing some crunches in terms of staff time resources. We had done some digitization projects where we had taken some materials from the special collections and archives and we had created some exhibits. And we had some experience, just enough to know that there were some serious issues awaiting us there if we decided to do more of that work. And so our task was to sort of spell out those issues, in part so that the dean could use that to go to upper administration and argue for additional resources that we needed, like staff time and money for software and things like that. And that required, if we're going to do that, some strategic thinking. We were going to have to answer some basic questions about what is it we are doing, why are we doing it, who are we doing it for, and most importantly, what's keeping us from doing the things we want to be able to do. Strategic planning, I think, is really important for digital object management because it's so resource intensive, because things change so quickly, and because there's so many different file formats and potential audiences, researchers inside the university, outside the university, graduate students, undergraduate students, and you can't do it all, so you really have to make some careful, thoughtful decisions about what you're not going to do, as well as what you are. So there are a lot of different ways to do strategic planning. We got together and we just started talking, and that was not working. Because there are so many different ways that conversation can go. Things just sort of bled into one another, and we sort of floundered for a little while because it seemed like we couldn't get a handle on the problem somewhere. So we decided what we needed was a structure for the conversation. And there are lots of different structures that already exist that will help you do strategic planning, like SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. There's balanced scorecard, there's pest analysis, there's scenario planning, which actually has its origins in the US military. But none of those really would have worked. Like if we had done a SWOT analysis, that would not have worked at all because defining our strengths wouldn't have helped us. What we were trying to focus on were challenges. And defining external threats, which is also part of a SWOT analysis, wouldn't have helped us because we weren't really focused on what was going on outside the library. We wanted to know what we were doing. So what we did was we created our own sort of structure for the conversation. And what we did was we broke down all the different kinds of digital objects into these 6 categories. And some of them were based on format, and some of them were based on how we worked within the library. So those categories were scholarly and creative output, learning objects, institutional records, commercial content, research data, and digital projects. And we went through each one of those and we asked ourselves, what is the scope of this category? What do we mean when we say digital projects? What do we mean when we say research data? Very specifically, what kinds of objects are we talking about? How they're created, who they're for, what format they're in? And then we asked ourselves, okay, why are we interested in this kind of digital object? Is it a mandate from outside the library? Is it because we feel like we have expertise to offer? Is it because something upper administration just expects of us? And then we looked at why, what our audience was. Was this for researchers inside the university, outside the university? Was it for undergraduate students, graduate students? Who was our primary audience? And that gave us some context that we could use then to talk about challenges. And it was only once we were sort of through that that we were ready to talk about what is it that's sort of holding us back here. And I think the takeaway from that for me was that if you're going to do strategic planning, it's a little bit like chess. So chess has rules, right? You can't just take your piece off the board. Bishops have to move diagonally. The king can only move one space. And it's by removing certain possibilities that you're allowed to focus your attention on the possibilities and alternatives that remain, right? Because if chess didn't have rules, you'd just be like throwing pieces at one another. You're not going to get anywhere. And so imposing a structure on the conversation really helped us to get a handle on the problem. And you don't have to use a pre-existing structure. You can create your own. The structure has to fit the conversation you want to have. So, you know, SWOT or PEST or something like that wouldn't have helped us. We had to create our own, and that's okay. And then the outcome of that was that we decided, we took all of that, we had like 6 pages at the end of that that had all this information about these different categories, and we boiled that down to a 3-page report that sort of gave some context and then talked about, here are the major challenges grouped by theme. So one of them was preservation. We needed a more robust preservation plan. We needed to do some work on our collection development policies to be clearer with people outside the library about the things that we did and did not collect, and to make sure that there wasn't a lot of overlap so that we weren't wasting effort. And also to create some frameworks that would help us decide what sort of new staffing we need to hire and what sorts of new software we needed to buy. And so we have now started that process, and we are actually in the hiring process for 2 of the positions that we proposed. That's it.
I'm Jeff Reynolds, the archivist for the Joint Archives of Holland at Hope College, and I'm going to be talking about how our experiment with Content DM turned out to be successful and our experiment with DSpace did not. When we first started our drive to put our images online in large quantities, it had been an idea of mine for a while, but I almost needed to have the right dean come along to help push it. So there is hope. So when Kelly Jacobsma became the new director at the library at Hope College, she talked out loud about strengths and things that we could do in the archives to better show what we had. And we have such good stuff. So you can see a few of the things that we have up there now that are almost all digital, including our oral history interviews, but I'm going to concentrate on images today. So I'm going to go right to the library. Even though historically our images show up as a catalog search, you could never look at them. So the whole idea was, how do we put our images online so people can enjoy them in the middle of the night? And if you wanted something to put on your wall of your cottage, you could get high-res copies sent to you for free. But you wouldn't be, slowing the internet down with high-res TIFFs and things like that. So we decided to, Digital Commons is another conversation. You can go through and find our images through Digital Commons, which is a repository that a lot of people are using now. We use it for a lot of different things, including a link to our images. So it's kind of a jump-off point. We tried the same look that you see here with DSpace and Digital Commons at this, or Content DM at the same time, to have a true comparison side by side to see which one would be best. And I had gone and done the nightly training for DSpace, came back, and then we started talking about Content DM through OCLC. And since it was free through OCLC with a lot of extra support, and we found that we loved the creative juices we could put onto a Content DM page versus DSpace, and it was just harder to use DSpace. So our digitization committee finally voted to go with Content DM, and then we started loading the images heavily. In order to pick our images, we went ahead and just chose the images that I had digitized with my staff for projects that had been finished in the last few years, one of which was The History of Science at Hope College. It was a book that had been written, so of course the archives had all the images stored properly. This was when we did that huge multi-hundred image scan job. We did both TIFF and JPEGs so that we'd never have to do it again. And each of the folders at these images, like Dr. Vanderwerth, those were all scanned for preservation quality, but also we dumbed them down for JPEGs to go on to Content DM at the same time, so we didn't have to do it twice. And then each of these folders, there might be 20 in each. We've kept track of which ones have been digitized, so you don't have to do it twice. You don't have to expose it to yet more light. So as we worked our way through more projects, the Nykirk competition, which is a women's-only musical showcase competition that Hope College is known for. That was our second one. And then we started talking about the student life images. A lot of our alum, and you have to keep your alum happy, wanted to know if he had images of them. So what we did is we put all of our student life images up on Content DM, and they just browse them at their leisure. And if they want something in a higher resolution, they just contact me, and I send them a cloud. I'll go up to the cloud and drop one in, and they just take it and, of course, follow all the citations so that they know where it came from. Our second book came along, Envisioning Hope College, which was about the beginning of that college, or our college, from the early Dutch settlement in Holland. And then one we just finished, History of Holland, which is a 1,500-page, 3-volume books on the history of Holland if you find yourself needing a lot of Dutch history. So we took all those images, which I think were 400 we contributed to that, of the 800 images in the book. And of course, I had to caption each one, because it turns out the archivist was the only one that knew what the images were of. So sometimes the historians need some help. And our latest large content is all digital because we don't own the real postcards. Mike Van Ark is a huge postcard collector in the West Michigan area. So I made an arrangement with Mike to go ahead and digitize all 8 of his scrapbooks, which will be about 1,200 images. And then we decided not only will we do the front, but we'll do the back. So while we have not gone to a crowdsource type project, we found out that the Hope College kids would rather do it for us just for fun in the library. So when there's a lot of text, we have young people in the library are now transcribing all the postcard handwritten materials. This one is very simple. It's compared to some, but as you can tell, there's quite a bit of data just in this 4-line description about where it went. And of course, like I said before, a lot of people are finding that these are really nice images to have on the walls of their cottages, so they can browse these in the evening, contact me during the day, and then they can have a nice image of Centennial Park on their wall as soon as they can get to Meyer and have it done. But it's not all just browsing. We ran into a real problem with Mike's collection because it's so large. It's about 10 gig in the TIFF format, so we went ahead and dumbed it down to JPEG for the web, but we also made some browsing categories, which we had to in this case because postcard collections have a lot of variety to them. You have to find similarities, otherwise people aren't going to take the time. You have several thousand images, they get bored very quickly. So you not only can you use the search engine to look up boats, but you could also just browse. This is a famous shot of the International 110 sailboat fleet that was in Holland for a while because the boats were built there exclusively. So this is the International 110 Association loves this image, and this is how they found it. By doing a simple Google search, they were able to find our International 110 photo. And we're finding that the next step for us, anyways, at Hope College, is not only to share the Content DM and Digital Commons material in the archival registers through Summons, which is our new search engine at Hope College. Some of you might have Summons as your search, so that everything is brought together in one easy search. And it'll bring up boats of images or anything, the archival registers that we might have will be brought up as a single search. So you can just do multimedia, if you want to call it, just from that. So that's what we're doing with our Content DM. We're very happy with it. In fact, if you're aware of OCLC, I think you get 10,000, I think it was 10,000 images was your introductory price of free. We end up drinking the Kool-Aid, and we bought the second version, which you get thousands, maybe even unlimited now. Or we'll just go ahead and do the whole Hope College collection, just get it done. We have all the students that we can hold, and they love to scan, believe it or not. And I should say, too, in the spirit of undergraduate research, which Hope College is very big into now with the Mellon Scholar program, is that all the metadata that are seen in these images were done by our senior, Amanda Palomino, who is going to go off to library school next year. So we found out that undergrads can do metadata, and now we have a junior doing the metadata, so we're working our way down in the class order. And then we had our current Wayne State intern, Justine Bailey, is doing metadata as well. So she has a little bit of familiar with Dublin Core in the real world. So that's what we're doing with Content DM at Hope College. Did we have any questions or no? Good. If you do, I'll be around a little while after we get done, or just email me. You can always email me at Hope College. For Mike's collection, it's going to be about 1,200 with everybody combined, probably 2,500 online. And again, we have the TIFF version too, so it's kind of really wiped out the need to think long-term about doing them all over again. We just made the decision to do it the right way the first time, and we don't use CDs. Our CIT, our computer department, loves to give away space on the U drive, so we do it as much as we can. So thank you.
Great. I'm going to be talking a little bit more high level about web archiving and Archive It. Ed Bush from MSU will be talking in more detail about his implementation a little bit later on. But first, I just wanted to give a little bit of context here. So first, let's see. Just a little bit about the Internet Archive. We're a digital library, and we were founded in 1996 by Brewster Kahle. And the main location is in San Francisco, California, and that's the building there. I'm remote. I'm located in Ann Arbor, but it's a very, very nice main location. And what a lot of people know us for is web archiving. We have a lot of different types of content that we host on archive.org, but the Wayback Machine, or the Global Web Archive, is one of the main things that we're known for. And it's the largest publicly available web archive in existence, and in the past couple weeks, we just went over 400 billion URLs in that collection. So we started collecting web content back in 1996 when the organization was founded, and the content was made accessible in 2001. So this content is from not, the first days of the web, because as maybe you saw on Twitter this week, it was the 25th anniversary of the web this week. So, but it's pretty early on. In 1996, the web was not yet ubiquitous. So, we have a broad snapshot in the Internet Archive Wayback Machine, and we try to capture as much of the web as possible, but the web is very large, and it's always best efforts there. But one thing that we found that was, many organizations were interested in was having a way that they could select what websites would be captured, provide metadata, context for that content, and really create curated collections of web content. And so that's why we developed Archive It, and it was launched in 2006. And it's web-based, so there's nothing to download or install. And the content that's captured is hosted and made accessible from our Internet Archive servers. There are different tools for selection and scoping of websites, ability to specify the frequency, so how often content is captured. The archive content, it really runs the gamut of content that's available on the web. A lot of our partner organizations are really interested in providing the look and feel of the websites that they're capturing, and others are really more interested in the files that are on those sites, because that's the main way that a lot of PDF reports, a lot of different documents are made accessible. And then content can be available, made publicly available, and it's fairly rapidly available within 24 hours. And there are restricted access options, but most of our partner organizations are really libraries and archives who want to provide public access to this archived content. And speaking more specifically about our partner organizations, there are 295 organizations, and there are a range of different institution types that are using ArchiveIt. And really kind of, what they're doing, what their goals are, to really kind of define web archiving here. They're wanting to collect portions of web content, preserve those collections and provide access to them. And, a web archive can be on a topic, an event, a subject area, or, a web domain, an institution's web content. And one of the things that many of our partner organizations find really challenging is that there is a lot out there. So a lot of content is being created, and not a lot is really being thoughtfully collected and archived. So kind of figuring out what to archive, what is really important, what will help fulfill an organization's mission, their goals, and help enhance some of the traditional archival activities that they're already doing. So some of the use cases that we've seen, and I would say the two main ones are those first two there. So many organizations are creating thematic or topical web archives on specific subjects or events. So sometimes this is to enhance paper or other digital collections that organization holds. So they're saying, we have a collecting area in human rights, and there's a lot about human rights on the web. So we're going to select websites to help enhance these, maybe paper holdings that they have. Or sometimes it's a new collecting area. It's something that's unfolding on the web, something that's unique to web content, like a spontaneous event is one example, like maybe a local event, like a tornado or an earthquake, or something like that, or even a positive, happy thing that really has an impact on the community or on the areas of interest to the organization. And then, a lot of organizations have a mandate to capture or preserve their own institutional memory, or, in the case of things like state libraries and archives, of the state level institutional memory and history. So, oftentimes organizations are capturing their own websites, capturing, other places that they're mentioned on the web, or other presences that they may have, like social media, or they're using web crawling to capture documents that are on the web that aren't easily captured otherwise. And then this last one, it could really fall into either of these above categories about closure crawls. So sometimes there are websites that are going to go away entirely, or websites that are going to change tremendously. Your university's website is being totally redesigned, and you want a record of what it looks like today, so that tomorrow, when it's very, very different, you can look back and see. Because the web designers will tell you everything is still there, it just looks different, but that's not always the case. So we do have some different ways for this content to be made accessible. I did mention, some people have private collections, but so for those cases, partners can log in. We have a web application where they can access private collections. For publicly available content, the general public can view that content on our website there at archiveit.org. Many of our partners create landing pages on their own websites that link back to the data that we're hosting. And so this could include, either a landing page or linkages in their, online catalogs, things like that. So many of them, make this content findable where their users are at. So any attempts to bring that closer to their users is really, really useful. And then as far as storage and preservation goes, we really are big proponents of keeping, multiple copies, and encourage our partners to do that as well. So, we have 2 copies in our Bay Area data center, and we encourage our partners to keep a copy of their data locally if that's something that they can and, desire to do. As other people have mentioned, geographic distribution is always nice when it comes to preservation. And we also have some digital preservation partners, including LOCKSS, which stands for Lots of Copies Keeps Stuff Safe, and DuraCloud also. And then just to kind of show a little bit of work that we've done as far as kind of some web archiving best practices and working with the community. Because we have all these different partner institutions who are implementing web archiving based on their own, local institutional cultures, their own, financial or other resource-based constraints. We developed a model. Actually, Graham over there is the one who put this together. I mean, in conjunction with the Archivate team when he was an intern. So there are a couple of different levels. There's kind of the higher policy level where you're setting policies around web archiving. What's your vision? What are your objectives? What resources do you have? How are you going to implement this? How do you see use happening? Preservation, risk management, those kinds of things. And then in the middle, in the kind of yellowish orange section, is more of the day-to-day work. So, what are you going to select, the actual work of picking what websites to capture, picking how much of those websites to capture, actually doing the capture, getting that content, storing it, and, doing some kind of quality assurance on that content. So we published a white paper that goes along with this model that draws from different organizations' implementations. And we really, feel strongly about, working within the web archiving community to help foster creation of best practices or okay practices. What are people doing, and what are their processes? So.
Thank you. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Devin Higgins. I'm the digital library programmer at Michigan State University Library. I'm going to be talking to you today a little bit about a tool we've helped create to facilitate some digital humanities and text mining type research at MSU using a large-scale textual data set. So for us, the story started last year when MSU began participating in the Google book scanning project. So we submitted some books to be scanned by Google. And as part of that arrangement, we arranged to then host locally a significant part of the text of books that Google had scanned. So it wound out that we were able to host all of the public domain books that were digitized by Google. And so that wound up being about 3 million volumes total. It's about 3 million terabytes of text in its zipped up form. There's 12 gigabytes of XML, MARC XML metadata. And then there's also a lot of a lot of technical metadata as well as part of the collection. And so this collection is remotely synced with the HathiTrust, so that if there's any changes in the collection at the HathiTrust end, which there periodically are, then our local version of the collection is automatically updated. So we have this material now. It's accessible to all MSU users. But the way it's immediately accessible is in this sort of browsable file system. And the way that you can browse this file system is not very user-friendly at all. I mean, in fact, it's not something you would ever really even do. The way it works is that each item has a unique ID, and then using something called the pear tree directory structure, if you're familiar with that, the unique ID is broken down into a path to get to the item. So browsing this data is only really possible if you have a unique identifier going in, and then you can sort of find your way to the text immediately. But this isn't, anything like the type of use that any user could actually benefit from having. So we tried to endeavor to make something a little bit better, and to move it from being just sort of accessible in the merest sense of the term to actually being usable. But this is kind of a unique textual data set. The text isn't there necessarily to be read. There is a prohibition on making it available for public display. And again, this is the OCR text, so it's not the page image scans that Google made. It's the OCR text that was created from those page images. So this is text that's expected to be used for non-consumptive research or text mining. So what that means is a sort of large-scale text analysis project that looks at hundreds or thousands or more of text at once, looking for patterns, doing things like word frequency analysis, network analysis, topic modeling. And the idea of doing this type of research is kind of born out of, I think it's Franco Moretti from Stanford who talked about, he studies world literature, and so world literature is this almost impossibly large discipline. A human being in their lifetime can only maybe read a set number of books and keep a much smaller number of those books in their head to analyze at any one time. So it'd be great if it was possible to do and say something about all those books that remain unread, the hundreds and thousands of books that we don't have time to actually read closely as human readers. So we're trying to facilitate that type of research using the HathiTrust data set. And so what we've proposed to do and what we've built so far as a prototype is a tool for work set creation that allows users to look at this whole HathiTrust data set that we have, the 3 million volumes, and then build useful work sets from that total based on a particular research question that they're interested in addressing. Mostly looking at the 3 million volumes themselves as a whole would be completely overkill. So what we do is we allow the user to subset the larger data set around particular features. And so these can be things like publication date, language, author, literary form, bibliographic level, so that a user can target just the set of text that they need and that they want. So a sample query that you might put out there to create a subset would be something like 19th century French fiction. You want to get all the books that fit that criteria. So then you'd be looking at publication date between 1800 and 1899, books that are in French. For the literary form, you might gather together fiction plus novel plus short stories. And then maybe the bibliographic level might be just monographs, or you could include serials there as well if you're interested. So anyway, if you run this search, what you get back is 3,338 volumes from the HathiTrust. And so this could be then the work set that a particular scholar runs their algorithm over, this set of about 3,000 volumes. And just to give you a sense, there's a lot fewer French volumes than English. So the same search for English 19th century fiction is 39,000 works come back from that search. So here's what the tool looks like in its prototyped form. It's a website created in Django, which is a web framework for Python. And so it's pretty simple. The user can go through and gather together the features that they want to include in their search for text. So there's things like the content type, which would include language and material, but there's also things like maps in there, so that could be something that a user wants to get back. The bibliographic level, author, literary form gives a range of selections like novel, drama, essays, short stories. And then nature of content lets you pull back works that might have a bibliography in there, encyclopedia, dictionary, that type of thing. And then with language, there's quite a few languages in the HathiTrust set. I think there's probably over 100. Many of them with very few works, but there are quite a few languages that you can find text by using this tool. So if you submit your query using this interface, what you get back is, first of all, the number of results, but then also the sample results from your query. So from here, you can actually link to the HathiTrust version of this text, which is a more readable counterpart to the OCR text that we have. So you can go to the HathiTrust, confirm that the type of result you're getting with your query is what you would actually want. And then if it is, you can come back here and kind of have some options to then download text and metadata to perform the type of analysis you'd like to do. So that's what the right-hand side download options box does, is it gives you a few choices about how you'd like to download this material. And so the first thing that we let you do is either to download all of the results. In this case, I think it was about 1,500 volumes. Or actually, in this case, it was about 100,000 volumes. So you can either download all of the text at once, or you can create a subset of a number of your choosing of results. And we do that to kind of encourage some experimentation or play with the collection, so that you're not risking so much by downloading 100 volumes as you are by trying to download 100,000. So you can test out your algorithm on a smaller subset, and then once you have it sort of worked out, the bugs removed, then you can come back and download perhaps a much larger set of text, and then rerun the analysis. Then we give users the option to download full text, which can be either zipped volumes or unzipped, as well as bibliographic or technical metadata. The bibliographic metadata is just the mark XML. The technical metadata is a METS file. So far, we haven't thought of good use cases where researchers have needed that technical metadata, but we remain hopeful that someone will use it at some point. And so then we also give you the option to download the unique IDs. And this is helpful because then you could potentially take this list of unique IDs back to something like the HathiTrust Research Center and use those IDs to get maybe the page images, which we don't have the capacity to offer, or do some further research with the HathiTrust API. So this is still in sort of a prototype phase. We've shared it with some colleagues in the libraries and some faculty members to get their take on what sort of uses they could put it to. And one thing they found was that while there was some use for this type of tool that uses the bibliographic metadata, it would be really great if we could go even further. So we started talking about moving from just using book level metadata to also using linked data and gathering together some URIs for particular entities encoded in the metadata so that we could enable a much wider selection of searches to take place. So in this example here, I don't know how readable some of these colors are, but there's a metadata record where the author is Ralph Waldo Emerson. And so we have some information in the bibliographic metadata about the title and about the subjects that he used, or that librarians have described his book as being about. And so those could be criteria for generating a set of text. But also, a lot of our users are interested in not doing searches based on the book, but based on the author. So if we can connect Emerson to an authority file, like this one, for instance, here at the VIAF, then that gives us information about, for instance, the language associated with Emerson, his nationality, and his gender. So that would allow you just to go another step further and say, okay, I don't want 19th century poetry in English. I want 19th century poetry in English by American authors or by American men. So it allows you to just refine your search in a really much more useful way than you could without this information. And further, linking Emerson to the DBpedia database would allow you to go even more granular with interesting sort of pieces of data that might form together a search that you might want to use to make your work set. So for instance, something like birthplace, you could pull together works by all authors born in a certain place like Boston. Or Emerson here fits into a subject of American Unitarians. So you could pull together all works by American Unitarians. So this is something we're hoping to collaborate in the future with the HathiTrust. It's still something that's sort of pending. But our next step is to sort of refine the bibliographic metadata search and to hopefully push forward into linked data in the future. Well, thank you.
Hi, I'm Ed Bush from the MSU Archives. I'm going to be talking about our web archiving, what we've done at MSU. So I've broken this into 4 sections: what we did, what we learned, what we're doing now, and suggestions for other people. So basically our goal for web archiving is the same as it is for our archives, to preserve and make accessible historical, the sites of enduring historical and research value. And just about every office, actually I could probably say every office on campus has a website. And a lot of their information is only on the website. It's not anyplace else. So we've decided that, capturing our websites is an integral part of our mission. So prior to 2011, the staff had captured some snapshots of websites. There hadn't been any really organized way that we had done web captures. And then in 2011, we had a graduate student do an inventory of our sites. And at that time, we had approximately 1,300 sites that were known by our IT group. And there were actually another 190 plus that were sites that weren't in the MSU domain. There were other websites like coachizzo.com. So at that time, we started a trial subscription with Archive It. And we started trying to do, my first thought was, okay, we'll just capture all of msu.edu. Well, that quickly became apparent that wasn't going to work. So, after running for 7 days, there's just a huge number of pages. And just within that, there were over, 3.6 million PDF files. So that kind of gives you an idea of what we were encountering there. So what we did, we started to create our seed list or URL list for capturing websites. We started with the known list of MSU websites that we got from our IT department. And I decided at that time that I was going to create these 3 large collections and 2 smaller ones. I thought, oh, it would be less work to manage, fewer collections. So I had looked at some other Archive It customers, and they one of them that I had seen was another university, and they had divided theirs up in a way that seemed to make sense for me. So I had administration and services, I had colleges, schools, research centers, and institutes, and then I had student groups. And then I had created a couple smaller ones for whatever else there was. So topical events, so like a blizzard or something, or some other campus event, one-time event. And then, because I wasn't necessarily, may not have discovered all websites, I created this decommissioned MSU websites category. At that time, I also created a landing page for our website, so that on our main archives website, there would be a place to find our web crawls. And the other thing I did was I updated our retention schedules. I decided that websites would be considered publications, and so they would have permanent retention. And I created a web site collection plan. In that, I identified what metadata I was going to collect and a crawl schedule. So this is what our landing page looks like. Down at the bottom, I had what the pre-Archive It collections were. And then I have a search box up there that goes to the Archive It website. And this is what our web page looks like on Archive It at the Internet Archive. So after doing all this, since 2012 was when we became subscribers, one of the problems I found is that, once you start a collection, like I created these big collections, there's not an easy way to undo what you did. So I've created all this administration collection is still too big. So when you start a web crawling program, you need to decide if you're going to be a lumper or not. What I've started doing now is splitting these collections into smaller ones. So now I have a number of collections. I've pulled libraries out of the administration one. I still have administration and services. I pulled the alumni out of that group. I pulled athletics out of there, created their own. Colleges is still pretty much unchanged. I pulled out the unions that are on campus. There's actually about 10 to 12 websites just devoted to MSU unions. I pulled out all the news organizations. There's the state news. There's a bunch of non-MSU newspapers about MSU. I started doing some social media. There's some special MSU projects that are sponsored by MSU. I pulled them out. The student groups, that one I've left unchanged, but it's constantly changing because student groups appear and disappear like every semester, it seems like. I've kept the topical events, and then I added arts and culture, which I had pulled out of the administration group. Some sites are just really tough to crawl. I'm constantly encountering where some sites will get into this, what I call recursive mode, where the sites are actually generating web pages, and they create a valid web page with no error message. So the crawler for Archive It doesn't know it's a bad page. And so it keeps going through and generating more and more pages. And what I have to do is, with help from Lori and others, is we put these regular expressions in there that I put in keywords that it keeps repeating, like sites, modules, all. And so when it finds 3 of those, it knows that's a bad page. A lot of times I have to just use a text expression to try to keep some pages from being captured. And then I find you have to do a lot of test runs because things are constantly changing. Websites, the web developers are always changing their web pages. So you always have to do a test run. I've been putting some metadata in. At the collection level, I do quite a bit of the Dublin core fields. And then for each of the seeds, I'm just putting the title in. And what Archive It has that's nice is that it'll grab the web page title, and then you just save it. And it'll always capture that web page title. So what I've learned, it requires a lot more staff time than you realize. It's just one of my jobs, so I can only spend a few hours a week on it, but you could easily have somebody full-time doing web archiving. And as I said, websites are constantly being created or modified. You know, they change something and it'll break one of my crawls. It'll suddenly, instead of just capturing 5,000 pages, it'll capture 30,000. So you always have to do test crawls. That's just a mantra you have to remember. What I'm doing now, I'm trying to do more quality checking. I realized early on that a lot of my captures were just not good at all. I mean, they have the content, but they just don't look like the web page was. And it's because I didn't have time to go back and check them. So I'm trying to do more of that now, and they've added some new functionality that makes it a lot easier. As I mentioned, I've started doing social media. I'm doing the MSU Facebook page. I'm doing Flickr pages for a number of campus units. And I'm trying to capture all of the MSU YouTube channels. And that seems to work pretty well. Every once in a while I find a new situation. I have to report it to the Archive It people so they can tweak the code. And I've also started, besides our MSU collections, I've also started collecting websites for non-MSU sites that we have historical collections for. So we have some church records, or we have a speedboat group in Detroit. We're starting to capture the website. I've also added for some local history groups in our area, like Meridian Historical Group, the Greater Lansing Historical Society, other groups like that. Suggestions. Plan, plan, plan. What do you need to really capture? How much time do you really have to do this job? Can you afford Archive It or need to use a free tool? You can talk to Lori. Those guys are pretty flexible. They might be able to help you out. My suggestion is start small. Don't try to capture all of msu.edu. That just won't work. And then another thing is get the word out to the people creating the sites. At MSU, we have this Web Dev Cafe where web developers meet every month. And I go to that so I can kind of be in when they're talking about making site changes. So that's a good idea. And that's it.
Hi, I'm Portia Vesho. I'm the Assistant Director of the University Archives and Historical Collections at Michigan State University. I think it was Aaron who said earlier that access is easy, and I have to say that I disagree. We received a grant to digitize pages related to MSU's Vietnam project. After World War II, MSU was involved in nation building around the world, and the Vietnam project is the most well-known, well-researched collection, and it was one that we thought would make a really good project for a digitization project. And we partnered with other departments on campus, each providing their own expertise matrix in terms of their technical expertise, and the history department in terms of their subject expertise. We had deliverables. This is a website, or this is a grant, so we have to deliver things to the public. The website is also supposed to include the online finding aids, semantic search capability, and the mapping interface, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today. Okay, so if you're doing mapping interfaces, there's some things you need to think about before you start. We are looking at a very specific time in history. It's from the mid-1950s into the early 1960s. The map of Vietnam today is different from the map that it was during that time period, and in fact the map of Vietnam changed during that time period. So which map do we use? What level do we want to go down to? All of those questions we had to decide. And what we finally did is we decided that we would use the 1961 gazetteer from Vietnam as the basis of our collection, or of the map. One of the problems we had, there's not a lot of subject headings or sort of controlled vocabulary for mapping interfaces for Vietnam during this period. So the gazetteer provided a good place to start. And then we went and we found a map that most closely fit that gazetteer. And we decided that the mapping interface would be for people who are non-subject experts and give them an easy way into the collection if you don't know how else to search it. Some of the other issues we ran into, I've been talking a lot about Vietnam. Well, the collection contains information from countries other than Vietnam. Unfortunately, you're not going to find that information in the mapping interface because we decided to focus just on Vietnam. Also, Cora is the database that we are using to keep all of our metadata. It only allows us to tag one province at a time. So if there is more than one province mentioned, then you have to make a decision as to which one you're going to tag. And again, for a lot of these records, it doesn't mention a specific specific province. It only mentions the country. So then you have a lot that don't have a province. It's just tagging the country. So this is what we had designers come up with. So this would sort of be the introductory page. There are some directions you can toggle on and off. They decided to choose colors based on sort of historic maps you would see in old books. And you could choose a date if you look in the upper, I think it's your right-hand corner, or maybe your left, no. And then on the other side, you can see you can choose the type of material you want to search. And we kind of, I don't want to say we dumbed down, we made it less jargony. So we use letters instead of correspondence. We would use posters instead of broadsides. Again, this is for a non-scholarly audience. Then you make those decisions. It pops up with the numbers in the province that comes up with. And then we have a one for that's kind of out in the sea for just the country of Vietnam. Then you go in, you can choose your province, it goes in closer. The dots mean nothing. It just is something that you can hover over and it will preview a document for you. And on the side you can see more documents. You can click on a specific document and it shows you which little dot it relates to, even though, like I said, the dots don't really mean anything. And then it will pull up the object for the the metadata for the object. And this is just a sample. This is not all of the metadata that will show up. There's going to be a lot more. But that's just kind of to walk you through the steps. So this is as far as we've gotten so far. Our next steps is we're doing user testing next month to see how this interface works with non-subject specialists. So we're going to be asking them about things such as, does it make sense? One of the things we thought about a lot internally, does it make sense to have just a country tag and have that out in the ocean? I argue you lose a lot of records if you take that away, but other people argue it's kind of confusing for researchers. The little dots are another thing that we would do user testing on. The other thing that we realized, again, a little after the fact, was we're basing this on a historical map, and modern technology, modern GIS technology that allows you to do mapping is based on current maps. So we're going to have to somehow figure out the GIS coordinates and map our historical map to a modern map in order to get all of this to work in the first place. So that's it. Thank you.
I'm Nathan Kemmler. I'm the collection manager here of the University Art Collection. And I'm going to talk about a recent project about using our collection on mobile devices. Really, the collection here at Grand Valley is a public art collection, so we are on 5 different campuses, 5 different cities, about 125 different buildings with collections in them. And so the challenge was how to make that accessible and useful for faculty and staff and the general public. So it all began, we're trying to figure out how the central data management system needs to be created. Some of the traits there I was looking for initially being something that we needed to control remotely and send out updates across the board on. We didn't want to, have multiple copies and update slowly. We wanted to update one place and have it affect everywhere. So the option for us was the open source collection management system, Collective Access. It plays nicely with all kinds of different media formats. It has Dublin Core, PB Core, Spectrum, all kinds of the institutional standards. And what we, of course, the API is what makes it very useful for us. We are able to, make a web service call on the data, throws it to us in nice, clean XML, and then we're able to build whatever interface we want the data to be on. So I can change a location, and it instantly updates across all platforms. So we initially had of course, the online website for browsing and searching, and then we decided really for this type of collection, we needed a mobile presence. And so we did some research. We found out, yes, we do need to do mobile presence. It's a growing thing. This is from a really nice data set called the Google Mobile Project. 3 years worth of data on smartphones. You can create your own custom charts. So you can see here 56% last year in the United States with smartphones, higher on college campuses. How people use smartphones, how important it is to them. They don't leave home without them. All kinds of useful information and helping us determine how to initially set up this platform. So here's the first version. This came out 2 years ago. You see tours there, the kind of custom sets that we create. You can browse by buildings, by floors. You can search. You can save things. Here's a couple screenshots. Here's a tour. It drops down the pins using the coordinates of the artwork on campus so you can navigate to it via your phone GPS system. Here's an example of the artwork, the fields that are pulled out, the XML that we parse and display. But really, what happened was that's just a one-way information sharing, which wasn't that useful for our audience. So we decided to go back, look at how people are using phones for their most popular activities. And we found out it needed to be more engaging. We needed to allow for two-way information sharing. we needed ways to have our audience inform us on the data that they want and how they want to use it. So we did a little test. We did a game called Art Play. And we wanted, you've probably heard of this, gamification is the term. We wanted to see if we allowed these engaging elements, what would happen. So we ran this for a semester. And yes, we did have more people using the art collection. We also used these displays around campus. This is using Silverlight from Microsoft, again, pulling the APIs from the database. And we're able to have this game running where people voted on artwork and they got points. And we had students playing at 3 a.m., 4 a.m., every 5 minutes, in part because we gave out real prizes. Here's one student, Gay Lynn, who won 5 weeks in a row and won something like $60 worth of gift cards. And again, here's what we're after today. We want the information going back to the database. So we want to allow for users to, if they want to do a poetry response to an artwork, a way for them to upload that to the database and share it with their peers or their colleagues. Same thing with musical compositions, dance performances, even we're talking about virtual graffiti where you can mark up a piece virtually and then share the filter with friends. All this we want to capture in our main collection database system called Collective Access. And what is really exciting about it today is that we have multiple institutions going to it in Michigan, and especially West Michigan. Calvin College is going to be our first guinea pig. They have switched to Collective Access, and they will be using our mobile framework as the first institution outside Grand Valley. So we're making this open source as well, so any institution in the world can have a free management system with a free mobile framework on top of it. And it's quite exciting because what this means for us is that we now have a larger base of support for adding new features, fixing bugs, troubleshooting. We have a whole West Michigan coalition going, so if we want to build one day a portal, we can pull all the same web calls, get that nice same XML, and share information freely. And if you want more information, there's the link. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa Schmidt. Oops. How do I start the show? Thank you. I'm Lisa Schmidt from the MSU Archives, and I'm going to talk about the Trusted Digital Repository that we're developing. And here's our OAS model. We're developing a repository that's based on this model, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And our plan for building out the repository includes all the parts to the OAS model, submission and transfer function. We do our processing using various pre-ingest tools. We're ingesting using the Archivematica application. We want to be doing our repository and data management through Fedora Commons. Our archival copy storage, including dark storage, we're using IX storage servers, and we want to develop an access system using the Islandora framework. And on this slide, I'm showing the 3 parts to this that we are actually currently have working for now. I'm going to talk a little bit about every part of it, but I'll focus mostly on the Archivematica ingest portion of it. And this diagram shows, again, what parts we have in production at this time. So I know I'm going to be talking about our digital backlog and how we started processing and ingesting that. Some of you who were at the MMDP conference last August. Some of this may sound a little repetitive to you, so I'll try to get through it kind of quickly. So we had an immediate need for a processing plan for our digital accessions. We had a lot of content on removable media, especially, and you know, we experimented with various ways to process this material, and we decided to take a closer look at Archivematica when it was in a late beta about a year and a half or so ago, and it seemed like it was actually something that might work for us. And a few people have been talking about Archivematica today. This is a features list, basically that I got from their website. It's an open source standards-based digital preservation system. It uses a microservices approach to processing, has a web-based dashboard. It uses METS premise and Dublin Core metadata, and it implements format policies that are based on the analysis of significant characteristics of file formats. And what I really liked about it was it automated the creation of the archival copies, the APEs, and the access copies, the DIPs. And it creates this METS file that contains the technical preservation, administrative, structural, and descriptive metadata. It actually extracts technical metadata, and it allows the entry of descriptive metadata. And it maintains the original format of the ingested files, normalizes for both preservation and access using either preset conversions, or it provides the ability to modify the presets. And you can customize your output destinations, which we have done, customizing the outputs to go to the IX server. It's supposed to be possible to integrate with Fedora and Islandora, although it's not really yet, but it's on their roadmap to make it, to integrate it. And then the latest version integrates with Archivist Toolkit, which is our collections management system. And there's a great deal of community and developer support. You know, they're very good at responding to questions and problems that we have. The thing I really liked about it was that we weren't locked into it. It seemed like a solution that we could implement now, and whatever we generated from it, we could always use in other systems later. So, like I said, when I was evaluating it, it was still in beta. And it seemed to work well enough, and it had gone to a later beta, version 0.10, around, I guess, late last spring. And so we went into production with it last summer and started to ingest our removable media accessions. I had some interns working on it last summer, and I have one working with me now, and she's actually sitting in the back of the room, Courtney. And we have had 200 successful ingests since then. And as I mentioned, it's finally out of beta, and version 1 was released in January. I've started testing it, and I'm hoping to go into production with it next month. It's been working pretty well. There have been some challenges. I mean, first of all, and I think Michael touched on this earlier, there's still a lot of manual pre-ingest processing that needs to be done. You know, you can't just press a button and it all works. You have to do a lot of things to these files before you can start pressing buttons. So there's a lot of arrangement that still has to happen that's manual. And there isn't one size fits all either. You can't say, okay, we're going to do this workflow for this type of content. I mean, it works for that type of content, but it might not work for another. So there's a lot of kind of special processing plans you have to come up with for these accessions. And manual work is required after the ingest. There is supposed to be integration with Archivist Toolkit in the latest version, but you know, up until now, we've had to actually still manually enter information into Archivist Toolkit, and we'll see how well that integration actually works. You can't make changes to the descriptive metadata in the METS file after you normalize the files. So you have to start all over again if you find a mistake or you just decide you want to add more information. I've heard there's going to be more flexibility with that in future versions, which would be good. We've also, you know, we've experienced some systemic failures, you know, failed SIPs and failed APE storage and things like that, and so we've had to do some trial and error with restarting the system, adding extra CPU, adding disk space. So we're learning as we go with that, and we do have scalability concerns. Large files and large numbers of files sometimes these ingests things just don't happen. It's like we have these lost ingest. And so we're still trying to figure out the optimal size of ingest. And also having more than one person working on it at a time sometimes can bog things down. So we're learning as we go. This is a free open source product, and we remind ourselves of that sometimes when it's not working. And up until recently, it was still in beta. So some other challenges we had, and this was our own problem, is when we first got started, our test environment was not the same as our production environment. So it's like comparing apples to oranges. So we had to make sure that, and we're still kind of struggling with that a bit. And so I would recommend that you try to, when you are testing software, try to have a test environment that's very, very closely matched to your production environment. We still have the integration with Fedora issue, and we need to have an access system that we can use the dips with. We don't have an access system yet. I sort of agree, I do agree with Portia that I think access is the hard part. Unlike University of Michigan, we don't have a DSpace repository at our library, so we still have to develop our own access system. And again, some of the more complex accessions that we have are rather complicated to arrange, and we're still trying to figure out the best way to do that. Some of the new features in Archivematica 1.0, let's see, they include the ability to add or change format policies in the dashboard. They eliminate unused interface options. There is a DIP upload to Archivist Toolkit. There's the ability to request to delete an ape via the dashboard, which is an improvement over having to go to the Unix command line. And the performance is supposed to be better, and so far in my testing, I have found that to be the case. And I've already noticed that it fixed one kind of niggling problem we were having with, we kept getting the store 8 failure for some of the PDFs, and it didn't make any sense, and that doesn't happen with 1.0, so I'm pleased to report that. So now on to the other parts of our Trusted Digital Repository. As I mentioned, we're using a number of processing tools, and I have them some of them categorized and listed here. There's always new tools out there, but these are just some of the ones we're working with right now. And for storage, we have 2 10 terabyte IX storage servers. One we use for our primary archival storage, and the other is a dark archive. And they both use free NAS, open source storage, and they're regularly synced together. And so the next things I'm going to talk about are things that we haven't quite, we've started developing, but they're not in operation yet, not in production. We have modified the Taper automated submission software that was developed by Tufts University. And again, we've gone ahead and modified it. It looks like it'll work. We just haven't integrated it with our system yet. And as I mentioned, we want to be using Fedora Commons as our repository software. We do already have an instance of Fedora that we're using in a database preservation project we've been working on, and we'd like to expand on that. Again, that's going to be that will need to be integrated with Archivematica. For access, we're planning to use Islandora, which is an open source software framework for the management and discovery of digital assets. It's built on Fedora Commons and uses the Drupal content management system and Solr search technology. And we'd like to use that for our access system. And I believe the latest version of Archivematica is partially integrated with that, but more on the ingest side, because you can also use Islandora for ingest. So at some point we might actually look at moving away from Archivematica to using Islandora, but that's way out in the future. Well, way out in the future. Maybe it's next year. Maybe it's not too far out in the future. So for now, Archivematica is a good solution for us. We're getting our processing done. We've got our metadata and our apes and dips. We're helping to shape the product through our own use and by reporting our problems and our experiences with it. We're also currently using a variety of processing tools to help with arranging and getting our files in shape for ingest. We have an archival storage infrastructure in place, and the other parts of our repository are in development.
The first group really identified institutional challenges as being synonymous with budgetary constraints and issues around funding. And I thought that was really interesting. And one of the ideas that came out of that group was this idea of building a campaign for our digital directions. And I think that idea was built around the idea that campaigns change. They have different talking points in different climates, but the idea is just kind of coming together with a standard, standard ideas that we can all begin to share with administration in our own interactions, because it's a big challenge in that way. The second group really identified a lot of challenges around being a responsible archive and kind of the idea of respect and having a seat at the table in terms of administrative conversations. And I think the third group identified maybe a path or an idea that we all might take back to our institutions, which is that in the last 10 or 15 years, there are examples of clear wins for us, where maybe our library or our archive has attracted a donor based on some work that our digital group has done. Maybe we haven't captured those very well, and it could be something that could go into our agenda as thinking back about institutional memory and trying to find some wins, because right now it seems very hard for us to answer that question of, or that challenge of how will administration thank us in 10 years? It's a difficult thing to answer, so we need some talking points now, and I think that we could learn from maybe some of our institutional memory of some of those talking points. So that's what we talked about.
All right, I'll talk about our tools table. One of the tools that I brought up was using Picasa for its facial recognition capability and for a way to quickly get images online to share. Let's see, another little question that kind of came up was like for small institutions such as religious organizations or other things about putting images online. Do you need to worry about permissions? It might be easier for that question to be answered for smaller groups. We were talking about IT departments and trying to get their help, and one suggestion was to if you could find something that would get their attention, find things that that would catch their interest, and you might get surprised with the results. There's a question about digitizing tapes, audio tapes and cassettes, and one tool that some of us use is Audacity. There was also ask about any way to speed up the process, and I guess you could pay for some expensive equipment, but generally you have to just do one by one and multitask. And then all of us were kind of, at the first session, we're interested in that collective access tool, so we're going to have to investigate that more. In the second grouping, a useful tool that was pointed out for doing batch processing was IRFanView. Another one that was mentioned was a tool called Flexible Renamer. If you're working with large data sets, using the tool OpenRefine, it used to be Google Refine. The example they used, they were working with 165,000 records, which had 200 columns, and they used it to clean up spelling and other format issues. We were talking about if there were any easy ways to do film video digitization, and if you got the equipment, it's fairly cheap, but you still got to store all those raw files. I found that it costs about $250 per hour of 16mm film to get, if you pay somebody to do it. Let's see. I pointed out that from our August meeting, if you go to archives.msu.edu and you go under About, where we had the conference information. If you look under past conferences, I have a tools list that we had published from the first meeting. Has probably 30 different tools that we're using, which includes a useful one that Lisa had mentioned was Terracopy. If you're on a PC and you want to preserve dates, it's a good one for doing that. And we were talking about OCRing PDFs, and most of us look like we're using Acrobat, but one group mentioned that they were told that an institution that really needed really high accuracy with OCR was running it through Acrobat plus 2 other OCRing tools, which got a very high return, but it probably took a lot of time.
Okay, I'm going to stay seated so I don't drop my tablet. So we talked about the future of digital preservation. The first group talked a lot about standards. The best line of the whole day is screw best practice. With the caveat that without the money, it's very hard to do well. We talked a lot, like I said, about standards in that first group. Regional partnerships will help a lot, and we see that kind of emerging now. Institutions doing this alone makes it a lot harder, and the whole kind of digital preservation process is probably going to be less institutionally bound. And we talked some on how standards for preservation in the analog world was really built on kind of grassroots practice that developed for decades, whereas standards now are really coming from top down, and there needs to be something to fill that gap. Someone suggested that we should call that best stopgap practice, and that we are the ones, librarians and archivists that are actually doing this should be the ones to come up with the standards. So, how do we actually kind of go about doing that and starting that discussion? I think with things like this. The second group talked about, we talked a lot about kind of formats. Someone said a great line, we're still catching up with the past. So it's hard to talk about the future. We're right now really bad at kind of representing 3D objects. So as kind of some types of formats have kind of stabilized relatively, like text and images. Video is still moving target as to what formats and things we'll be using. And then there's these brand new things like 3D objects. And what are all the things we are keeping, do we even need it? So do we need all of this kind of provenance that we're keeping when we change a file format? Will those things really even be needed? Cloud, so I have in my notes just cloud, question mark. That probably sums that up. So what role will the cloud play in this? And appraisal, like appraisal will, if anything, become kind of more important as we're inundated with all this digital content. In the third group, we talked a little bit about data and migration, and also like where is it actually being preserved. We had a good discussion around kind of the technology of storage. So yes, it's a good thing to get more capacity, but as the capacity grows, so will the content, and we're just going to get kind of more and more stuff. So it's the more storage can actually end up being a challenge than it can be a solution. How do we map the data to these new storage systems? The future will hopefully hold more tools that get us to this kind of good enough practice and that are built around that. A lot of people have money. Well, not a lot of money, but a lot of people have money more than they have staff or more than they have technical infrastructure. So will commercial services and commercial solutions kind of take a bigger role in the managing digital content in the future? We talked about 3D imaging again in this group, kind of as the demand of that in places like museums grow. And then I think kind of finally it struck us that in almost all of our discussions about the future of digital preservation, we always end up talking about the past. So we always end up talking about all of the 3.5-inch floppy disks that we get and things like that, and how it always is. We always are, like someone right now is digitizing or creating a digital file that will be our future in like 10 years when they walk in the door with it.
Well, My table talked about workflows, and we found that, of course, everyone's kind of at a different place in terms of establishing workflows, and some don't really have anything standardized or documented, and some have really good workflows for access and not so good for preservation, and the other way around. One thing that came up with those of us who have documented workflows is that it's probably a good idea to avoid being overly prescriptive. You can try to define everything down to the nth degree, but there's always exceptions, and it's better to maybe have it be a little broader and have important checkpoints in the workflow. The workflow needs to be road tested. You can document it, but until you have people actually using it, then you find out if it's working or not. And I know in our own case at MSU, I've gone ahead and documented a workflow, and then as my interns have been processing things, they've figured out ways to refine it. And I think probably a lot of you have found that with your student workers as well. And this is kind of goes hand in hand with the idea of the workflow not being overly prescriptive. Is one institution said that they had more success by keeping their workflow fluid, continuing to adapt it and adjust it. And they actually found that the creative license with the workflow actually resulted in getting better digital objects. One thing we've also found is workflows they're very complex, and you do have to create these different branches of them for different types of content. And for those of us who are archivists, this is kind of the nature of archives. We're always dealing with unique materials, and but then we have this whole complexity issue, and so even when you do document the workflow, it can still be kind of overwhelming to try to explain it to someone. And wouldn't it be nice if we could find better ways to automate the workflows too? So that's all.
All right, so we were at the metadata table, and some recurring themes that came up, I guess, repeatedly were collisions between, the past and the present and the future of metadata. In the first group, we talked a lot about how for new students learning metadata, it can be kind of mind-boggling how many different standards there are, and so it's hard to know which type of metadata to even use in the first place. But then on the other hand, there was the complaint about the catalog record, that it's something like the MARC record, that it's very fixed, and so it can't actually do what you need it to do. So there's kind of a clash between a different set of problems associated with the metadata world and the cataloging world. We also discovered that metadata is a good place for perfectionism to clash, unfortunately, with really messy data. And so we talked a little bit about how you clean up metadata, some of the methods for doing that. We also talked about linked data. And in general, there's a lot of enthusiasm for linked data around libraries and archives, I think. But it can be a challenge to find real-world situations to put it into practice. There was also some concern with linked data that there's a loss of authority, that in the past with something like a catalog record, a library could write or copy their catalog record and store it away, and then it would be there until they changed it. Whereas something like linked data, it's possible that what you're using to refer to your item can actually be changed by other people out there, depending on how that linked data is kept up. So we also, in the third section, kind of went a little bit broader and talked about, well, what is metadata? And the typical example for us was something like a library object, but in fact, in today's world, metadata is kind of everywhere. And when you think of something like big data, it's kind of impossible to do something with big data without metadata to go along with it. And it's becoming the word metadata you hear a lot in the news with things like the NSA referring to phone record metadata. So it's something that's maybe impinging on the consciousnesses of people who never thought they'd have to think about metadata. And so we also talked about how there's a trend or there's a movement toward creator-supplied metadata as having a certain level of authority that's beneficial. And we talked a little bit about the challenges of moving old files, old pre-digital files and legacy databases into something with usable metadata. That's about it.
The FailCamp group talk more about, mostly talk about technology and workflow issues, planning, and project management. One that obvious is easily identifiable is the technology failure. When your hard disk failure and then you have to restore from the backup, and then you happen to rely on other unit within your organization to do the restoring for you, and they might not understand the content, and they might end up actually storing the wrong data for you. And then you have to come back and then clean it up and stuff. And also probably the communication of you rely on others to figure out how to fix the problem rather than you contribute to the discussion how your problem can be fixed. And also another about the not my baby problem, right? So you need a certain access to a certain content, but then the unit organization who owns that basically say, you cannot do that to my baby. Only through these layers of channels, and then you can have access to it, rather, but your work depends on that access. So that's another kind of hurdle. And also another we talk about putting the horse in front of the cart, and then you're doing some very ambitious project, and then not really put off a lot of thinking on the planning, and then how the process working might end up something good on the paper, but then when you do that in real life, something happen in the middle, and you have to come back, or a process get breakdown, and you end up getting stray to different kind of workflow, and then you have to go back again and figure out how to fix that. And also about the when the stuff that get digitized more than you can chew on, because you don't have enough time to do the quality analysis and quality assurance of that metadata or the project or image and stuff. And we also talk about legacy code. When you develop a software and application and use different programming language, and then the person who happened to know really well about that language left, and then who can fix that problem if something happened? So typically we just don't touch it until it breaks, right? And then something blew up. What else we talk about? And then we talk about, I think that's it, yeah.
Some of those things, to quote Max, education, education, education. I think we need to not only educate ourselves, but get education out to both the people who are creating the digital objects, but also to the people above us, so we can better sell our programs and get the support within our institutions that we need. Appraisal was a huge topic that was talked about today. Do we need to keep everything? What do we do when faced with big data? You know, the access versus preservation, neither one of them is easy. They both bring their own challenges. The fact that what we're capturing or what we even know about is only a drop in the bucket compared to what's actually out there. And collaboration. So how can we here work better together to help ourselves, you know, deal with some of the problems that we're facing? Is there more that we can be doing? And finally, part of collaboration would be any sort of future meetings where we could, again, get together, talk about it. I think, I think Nancy said the Grand Valley people really benefited from having her dean here to hear some of the work that's being done at other institutions, and maybe that will give them more buy-in here at Grand Valley. So how else can we help each other out? Does anyone want to comment? Thoughts? Anything that struck you today? Okay, good.
I think I'm gonna do a post-conference survey of everybody who came, and so we'll see which parts people liked and which parts you didn't like.
Yeah. Yeah, we usually do put a call out, so don't be shy about suggesting programs because the program kind of comes from people who are willing to talk about issues. So if you have an issue or a case study or an example that you would like to provide, just let us know. We're not a really selective program committee. If you say that you want to do something, odds are you're going to talk about it. So we just need people willing to talk. Did you have a comment or? Oh. Do you want to talk about the future meetings and some of the issues we've been running into?
Okay. One of the places we were leaning towards was Central Michigan University for the next one to keep with our Mid-Michigan theme for locations. And they really want to do it. The problem is that they can't do it until September or October, when we usually like to do it in August. And they can't do it on a Friday because the facility's already booked on Fridays for September and October. So we were wondering how people felt about CMU for the next location and also whether another day in the week would be workable for people. Do some of the new people that are here today, do they think they would come to CMU, the Grand Rapids people? Oh, Mount Pleasant. Yeah. So I guess we'll get back with Marion at Central Michigan and we'll find out what the date is going to be. It'll probably be, I'm probably leaning towards September rather than October, just because it's earlier in the semester. And we'll let people know. Well, unless you don't want to be added to the greater regional list for email, I'm going to be adding everybody's emails to Lance's list, and that will be our first distribution for announcements for this meeting.
Okay. Well, technically we're scheduled to go until 4:30, but I think that people have had a long day. We've lost a lot of our audience because they've got a longer commute back. Tour. Did you want to lead a tour? Okay. I was going to say. Okay. All right. So I want to thank everyone for coming out here today. Thank to Grand Valley State for hosting. If you're on the tour, please find Max. If not, I hope you people have a good trip home. Thank you.